Reading from Mark chapter 12, verses 13 to 17. Later, they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others, because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. "Why are you trying to trap me?" he asked. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin and he asked them, "Whose image is this and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were amazed at him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, if you were in Jerusalem in around 30 AD and you could go to the temple courts and listen to Jesus teach, and you could ask him a question, what question would you ask him? We've reached a section of Mark's Gospel where Mark records Jesus being asked a series of 3 questions by his critics. We'll look at the first one this week and then the other 2 over the next 2 weeks. This first one was asked by the Pharisees and the Herodians, and Mark tells us, verse 13, that their question was designed to ensnare Jesus, to trap him, to catch him out. Well, we don't really know who the Herodians were. There's plenty of speculation in the commentaries, but not a lot of data to go on. We know the Pharisees well, of course. They feature in the Gospels as those who were particularly keen to keep God's law and sometimes went to extraordinary lengths to do so. What we do know about these 2 groups is they feature together once before in Mark's Gospel. Mark 3, verse 6. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. So when they come to talk to Jesus here later, presumably in the temple courts, which is where we found Jesus last week, a few verses before this, we should probably not expect them to have completely pure motives. Listen to their empty flattery again. Verse 14, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." They really don't want him to avoid the question they're about to ask, do they? Just say it how it is, Jesus. Tell us God's true way on this one, because we know that's what you do. You teach the truth. And this is what they want to know. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? All right, so we need a quick recap on the circumstances here, because this imperial tax was a very emotive subject. This is not a purely academic question. It's an issue which got people's hackles up. Some may remember the poll tax riots of 1990. I was a student at the time, and as an ardent lefty, ideologically opposed to the government under Mrs. Thatcher, and what I saw as the injustice of the tax, I refused to pay it. Was I right? Well, let's see what Jesus says here, because this imperial tax was a poll tax. A quick bit of history. It was imposed in the year 6 AD, when Judea became a Roman province under direct rule. And as you can imagine, it didn't go down very well, just as our poll tax didn't go down well in 1990. One thing I do like about our present Prime Minister is he does know his history. Not all Prime Ministers have done. The 1st century historian Josephus tells us this: "A certain Galilean whose name was Judas prevailed with his countrymen to revolt, and said they were cowards if they would endure to pay a tax to the Romans and would, after God, submit to mortal men as their lords. That revolt was quickly stamped out, but a principle was established in the minds of some, that it was not possible to submit both to God and to the occupying Roman authorities. Well, the coin you had to use to pay that tax was this one, a silver denarius. And many of these have been dug up from the ground. You can even buy one on eBay if you have a few £100 going spare, although there's no guarantee it won't be a fake. I met a guy in Jerusalem once who was engaged in selling one of these coins on a chain to a tourist. I was sitting at a table outside a falafel bar on my own, and they came and sat opposite me and talked about this potential sale. And after the tourist left, happy with his purchase, I talked to the seller for about an hour, and he started opening up and telling me some quite eye-opening stories about trading in antiquities. Well, this is a photo, I think, of a genuine one. And so the way I think you read this coin is like this. Latin word order being quite flexible for reasons which need not detain us now. Tiberius Caesar, the Ti for Tiberius, goes with Augustus round here. This is a coin of Tiberius Caesar Augustus. We know him. He reigned from AD 14 to AD 37 as the Emperor of Rome. The lakeside Galilean town of Tiberias is named in his honour. Then if we look at this here, this F is short for Filius, which means son. And that goes with this, Divi Aug, short for Divi Augusti. Read together we have the phrase, son of the divine Augustus. Augustus was Tiberius's stepfather, who reigned from 27 BC to 14 AD, and who was deified upon his death. What the coin says then on this side is Caesar Tiberius Augustus, son of the divine Augustus. So here already is a massive insult to first century religious Jewish sensibilities. Not only is it a graven image, it also attributes quasi-divinity to a mere man. No one wants to be associated with that kind of idolatry. And then on the other side we have this, Pontiff Maxim, short for Pontifex Maximus, meaning the greatest priest, which was also a bit of a slap in the face in Judea, where the office of the greatest priest, the high priest, was supposed to be a Jewish priestly office. So I hope you can see how very offensive this tax must have been to all Judeans, but especially to religious types like the Pharisees. And so this is why the question is a trap. Jesus, O teacher of God's truth, should we pay this tax? If he answers with an unqualified yes, he's going to provoke distaste among his own countrymen. And if he answers with an unqualified no, he's going to draw the attention of the Roman authorities as a potential zealot and rebel. Now, so they've got him. They've nailed him. They've pinned him into a corner. The undoing of this Galilean preacher who behaves as though he thinks he is the Messiah is nigh. Except that what he does is he asks if anyone can produce one of those coins. It's a very nice move that he doesn't have one on him himself. It was actually quite a lot of money to have in one single coin, a day's wage for a labourer, Most day-to-day transactions were carried out with copper coins with no images stamped on them. But his questioners do seem to be able to produce one of these idolatrous coins. One of them seems to be willing to carry one around. Already their foothold on the high ground is slipping. And Jesus says to them this, "Take a look, whose image is this? And whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they meekly reply. "Well, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's," says Jesus in verse 17. And so here two paths lined with theological gold open up before us. I'd like to spend an hour walking along each one of them with you, but I fear you will simply switch me off. This is your power in virtual church. So let me just sketch an outline of where we could go. We are nearly there. Along path one, we could explore the fact that in most matters, Jesus sees no contradiction at all between honouring Caesar and honouring God. Why? Well, because God is sovereign, and maybe surprisingly, even cruel and occupying foreign powers can be understood as being established within his divine will. Now that scene in the life of Brian, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" That scene is quite well observed. Roman rule did bring order and peace, and in the first century at least, the freedom to worship as you chose. And in that respect, the Zealots were quite wrong. You could honour God by honouring Caesar in those areas where Caesar did not overstep his mark. There wasn't a necessary conflict between the two in all matters. Should I have paid my poll tax in 1990? Yeah, indeed I should have. Should you pay your taxes in 2020 and not try to evade them in any way that you can? Yes, indeed you should do so, for that is honouring to God. The question does arise, of course, of what you should do when the demands of the civil authorities are in conflict with the ways of God, and of how you even decide for sure when that is happening. Jesus clearly sets a limit on the legitimacy of the state by drawing a distinction between Caesar and God. But you won't get any spoon-feeding from him on how to decide when the state has overstepped its mark. You need to use your Christian mind, operating in the context of prayer and resourced by Bible passages such as Romans 13 and Revelation 13. Well, that's path one. Path two takes us along a route which leads to giving to God what is God's. That's the second half of Jesus' answer. See, these people have come to him and they've asked him a question about how they should orient themselves in relation to the man at the centre of the Roman Empire. And what Jesus' answer does is it reminds them that there's another question that they should be asking, a more important one, which is, how do you orient yourself in relation to the one who is at the centre of the universe? If you're interested in the question of paying your dues, well, where does God fit into that? So Jesus asks for a coin and they hand him one, and he says to them, "Whose image is this?" This is a genius question to ask. Incidentally, if you have the old NIV translation from 1984, you'll see that it translates the question as, "Whose portrait is this?" Well, the new NIV has fixed that. It is much better to translate it, "Whose image is this?" A few weeks ago, I made a sort of technical video about the translation of Exodus 15 verse 2, where I tried to explain why in that case I thought the old NIV had done a better job than the new one. And I didn't expect many people to watch it, but as it turns out, about 100 people have watched it all the way through. Quite a few more started off watching it, but gave up, mind you. But as a result, I've had a number of emails asking me if I don't really rate the new NIV and wanting to know if I use it in my own personal Bible study. So I do want to say I do actually love it very much. I think the new NIV has fixed many problems which you could find in the old NIV. And if I get time over the next few weeks, I'll make another kind of technical video for those who are interested about a passage in Matthew's Gospel which has been vastly improved and which actually leads you to an amazing spiritual diamond which you would have just missed in the old NIV. This here is another of those definite improvements. For image here translates the Greek word icon, which is exactly the word used in the Greek version of Genesis chapter 1 verse 27, which says this: "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them." Well, I think Jesus conducted some of his conversations in Greek, and so this is a very important allusion. If the coin bears Caesar's image, and so it should be given to Caesar, what do you have which bears God's image, and what should you do with it? The answer, of course, is you. You bear God's image. You are made in his image. And if what you have which bears God's image is you, then what should you do with you? The logic, of course, is that you should give yourself to God. The problem with these people who were questioning Jesus, these Pharisees and Herodians, was that they weren't doing that at all. With all their talk about wanting to know the way of God and all this stuff, what they were actually planning to do was to trap his son and ultimately have him killed. Well, it is worth thinking about what question you'd ask Jesus if you could. It's also worth thinking about how he might gently turn it round on you, because he does want you to think about where you are in relation to God. His whole mission, after all, was to draw people into God's kingdom, including me and including you.